Welcome to another Helios Sunrise interview today on Nestr. Welcome, Joost. You're part of the Helios Incubator program, so we've spoken a number of times. Excited to be able to have this conversation with you and dig a little deeper into the real essence and the purpose, the meaning behind what you're building at Nestr. On the homepage, the website, it says the future of work is decentralized. Maybe let's start off with their familiar territory, and then let's start to explore more of what you're doing. So what does that mean, and why is that relevant to today? The future of work is decentralized.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks for having me. For starters, wow, why is that relevant? What we see today is that there's a whole bunch of wicked problems out there in the world that we need to tackle, and no single entity can tackle them by themselves, right? So we need to have way larger collectives to start tackling these really big problems over times. And with crypto, we can see a couple of wonderful initiatives showing up on how to deal with resources in a decentralized manner, right? So the whole DeFi space, that's wonderful. But we don't really have proper answers yet on how to collectively coordinate and use those resources to make an impact. And that's really what Nestr is all about. So how can we come together and organize our work collectively, decentralized, so that we can really start tackling these wicked problems that no single entity can possibly tackle by themselves?
Got you. So when we talk about obviously that sounds like it's encompassing a massive, like everything. Let's say put everything in the mixing box there. For the time being, who are you wanting to actually speak to? Who is the relevant kind of group or community or organization? Is it governments? Is it supply chain organizations? Is it manufacturers? Is it DAOs? Who's relevant for you right at this time?
Well, we pretty much have two categories that we're focusing on, and they're not necessarily a single industry, but they're organizations that are willing and open to some form of decentralization. So this can be conventional companies that are self-organizing, and you can think of teal, holacracy, sociocracy. These are practices that are growing, and actually growing exponentially within regular businesses already. And then on the other side, there's DAOs that kind of by definition have to self-organize, and they are by definition decentralized. And that's not necessarily easy. So we're really running on two tracks to serving both these categories of organizations. And as you can imagine, that can really run across any industry.
Okay, perfect. So let's spend a bit of time to speak the language of those types of organizations so that they know they're tuning into the right interview that they really need to pay attention to understand what you're building for them. So you mentioned self-organizing. If organizations are moving towards some level of decentralization, are they already aware that what they're attempting to enable is self-organization? Do you think that's a common enough term, or how do we make that relevant to the kinds of organizations that think we've been too centralized, we're holding too much power, we're not empowering the staff enough, we're not retaining our staff because they're going off and doing these DAO crypto things where they whatever? What's that language that needs to happen to connect with those sorts of decentralizing organizations?
Well, I think it's a really good question, and actually we are still exploring what language really resonates. That's part of our journey. Like self-organization really resonates in the world that already speaks that language. Outside of that, that's harder. And I think what is more relevant there is to kind of turn it on its head and really say any organization that is experiencing the boundaries of today's tooling in collaboration, that's who we are speaking to. So if your conventional tooling of your Asanas, your Jiras of this world speak a language of hierarchy, which they all do, that's not going to benefit you for your decentralization. What are you going to pick up then? And that's really what we're stepping into. And that really requires a couple of paradigm shifts that are already happening and we're stepping into.
Okay, so let's stick with that for a moment, expanding on that problem space. organizations, managers, they're going to be recognizing these boundaries of today's tooling. You mentioned a couple there, Jira, Asana. Can you expand on that list a bit? Like what other types of tooling or approaches?
Well, so from Nestr's perspective, we're kind of we're playing in the field of collaboration. So that's the Asanas and the Jiras and the Workday, those sort of tools out there that we all know that work wonderfully well for those environments. And then there's the tools that deal with governance and our shared agreements, and that's crucial for any organization that wants to decentralize, because you no longer have a central body that dictates what needs to happen and that dictates what the rules are. Now we need to actually come together and figure out how we're going to collaborate and work together. So you need some level of governance. So we really, with Nestr, we're tackling both, which is a new thing, because there's some really wonderful governance tools out there. There's some really wonderful collaboration tools out there, but none that really combine those two together. So we're playing in that field, and it's a growing field, and we are about to figure out how big that can grow.
Great. So it is a discovery process, and like we're right on the cutting edge of how do organizations transform themselves to be able to enable, and I'm throwing a bit of my own perspective in, and correct me where I'm wrong, you see observations in the market, but staff, employees, managers, like even as a manager previously, I want a certain level of autonomy, but at the same time, I want my staff to demonstrate a certain amount of responsibility and accountability. So they're not coming to me with certain types of questions and challenges. I want them to feel empowered and be empowered and take some of the weight off my shoulders as a manager, so they can get on and do their stuff while I can focus my energies in a different particular area. You mentioned hierarchy a moment ago. Maybe what is the difference? How do we start to see hierarchy change to something that brings benefits to the managers and the staff?
Yeah. So and it's interesting, right? So a lot in your questions and your wording is talking exactly the language of hierarchy. So managers and employees, there's an innate parent-child relationship there. If we're talking decentralization, that relationship will have to change, and if it doesn't change, you can't escape today's reality, right? So it's a really tricky balance to figure out when and where to step in exactly. And sorry, can you reiterate your question?
Well, I'm just thinking there, like we're thinking off the cuff here, but HR departments, you think of hierarchy and managers, and it's like you have direct reports, right? You get a more senior position because you've got a handful of direct reports, and then you need to do evaluations on them, and you're kind of accountable for their performance. This is the hierarchy management structure. How we can either go in two directions. One is, what are the limitations or the pain points of that kind of situation? And then what on earth could we possibly do any different?
Yeah, so let's start with that pain point. I think that's a really good one, right? So the obvious pain point with hierarchy is that the higher up in the tree you get, the more well-rounded, all-encompassing people you need to kind of have for it to function, right? So at the top of the hierarchy, you kind of need to be able to speak everything and understand everything for it to work. And that's really the limiting factor of any management hierarchy to tackle wicked problems. So the promise of decentralization is that we eliminate the single points of failure in those hierarchies and replace it with not necessarily a flat organization, but a distributed authority, whereby you take, hey, I'm an expert in my field. I don't need any CEO to tell me what I can and cannot do. I'm the expert. If I can do that in full transparency with my peers, then all of a sudden we start to thrive and be able to tackle these wicked problems that we are facing. So that's the promise, and we're seeing results of that showing up in some different examples out there, and that's not just with Nestr, but just within the field of self-organization that has been doing wonderful work for decades already. I think the world of DAOs and crypto is really bringing decentralization mainstream, and I want to make sure that the world of DAOs can benefit from that wonderful work that's out there, so that it can scale and really start tackling some of these problems.
So when you mentioned earlier self-organizing, you mentioned a few different topics or organizations. One of them was holocracy,
Yep.
but there were a few others.
Sociocracy and
sociocracy.
Teal I mentioned. Yeah.
And what's that one?
Teal, that refers to the Reinventing Organizations book by Frederic Laloux, and he's taken the spiral dynamics color coding, applied it to some research he's done on different organizations.
Okay, so I know a little bit spiral dynamics. This is getting into, again, I'll revert back to the HR department. They've got boxes to tick, they've got paperwork to fill in, and onboarding new staff, and checking the quarterly reviews, and performance bonuses is part of it, and career development for managers. It sounds like the field of self-organizing teams is an orders of magnitude more complex. Again, correct me if I'm wrong. Is it actually, does it inherently a more simple and like natural feeling approach, or what's that journey, that transition from standard bureaucratic hierarchy to starting to adapt and get benefit from being self-organizing?
Well, so it's interesting, right? So it can deal with way greater levels of complexity because we don't have single points within the organization that need to encompass all. Now that's scary for starters. Like if you are an HR department and think, shit, I need to be able to deal with all of this complexity in order to start even thinking about decentralization, no way anyone is going to do that. So that's a pretty poor way of selling it. And what is a way more interesting perspective is the management hierarchy is deeply rooted in the idea of command and control, right? So we can predict, command, and control our environment to best deal with whatever comes our way. And then you're always reactive, and that's kind of the paradigm that today's big management hierarchy organizations live in. If you look at self-organization, it's all about sensing and responding. And once you really understand that shift, you can really sit back in your chair and realize, oh, all we have to do is sense and respond, and give everybody that is part of our organization the ability to sense. We're already doing that. We're seeing what happens. We see whatever comes to changes come to our organization, and respond to it, and then have the authority and autonomy to act on whatever it is what we see coming our way. And then you can really deal with complexities in a way that no management hierarchy ever can.
Yeah, brilliant. You mentioned also autonomy with full transparency earlier.
Yeah,
full transparency sounds like it's pivotal to, like, there has to be some level of checks and balances. We're not going to say command and control, but there has to be checks and balances in one shape or another. How does that happen when it's self-organizing? People are autonomous and they can sense and respond. Where's the security from an organizational perspective?
Yeah, so that sense and respond is not just to the outside world, it's also internally, right? If somebody is just sitting behind their desk and, I don't know, eating Twinkies all day, people are sensing that. In the management hierarchy, they already sense that as well, by the way, but they don't have the autonomy or the authority to act upon it. So that acting also needs to happen internally. Hey, I'm working my ass off here, and we are here carrying this purpose together. What are you doing? Please step up, and then actually create the safety within the team to make that addressable. Now that's easier said than done, but that starts by eliminating power hierarchies between people. Because as soon as you have a power hierarchy, if you are my manager and I think you're an a-hole of some sort, I'm probably not going to tell you, because you're going to dictate if I get a raise, a promotion, or maybe even be fired, right? So if we are about to become peers, that power relationship needs to end, and that starts with decentralization. That doesn't mean any of the problems that come with somebody not functioning properly shouldn't be addressed. And that's really where full transparency comes. Hey, what are you accountable for? What are you doing? That needs to be published constantly to everyone, so that anyone that is relying on it can actually speak up if you don't do your job.
Yeah, it reminds me of a book I read called Semco by Ricardo Semler.
Yeah, wonderful.
And just the short version is, if I remember rightly, Brazilian construction company, and he allows the organization to decide their salaries. Individuals decide what salary they get, and they can take off as much time as they want. They can go to their kids' baseball game, or they can go and play golf in the afternoon. There's hammocks available, an area for hammocks, so they can snooze whenever they want to. And they were encouraged to not sit in the same place every day, so that your managers or team peers wouldn't know where you are, so they can't like develop that pressure, social pressure of where are you? You're not at your desk, right? That's I mean, it was an incredible success. I don't know that there's a great deal many of such organizations to date. This book, I read it, I don't know what it was, like maybe 10 or 15 years ago. Inspirational, but it's maybe an extreme example. What is the journey that an organization, where's the starting point? Joost, how does a hierarchical, with a HR department, with managers who want power and control, what does that journey look like? Like, what are the first steps?
Well, what we first of all, Semco, I think it's a wonderful example. I believe it's actually one of the examples that Lalou also looked at in his book. There's a bunch of others out there, and so this field is not new. It's just not that well known. Now, what is well known is like the world of Agile and Scrum, right? So and that is often a starting point for most organizations that are looking and furthering the levels of autonomy within their organization. They say, cool, we've got Scrum and these teams work great, but now we've kind of moved all the problems to the edges of the team, but the problems are still there. How are we going to deal with that? And scaling Agile to the whole organization has all sorts of flaws. So it's often these organizations that have gone through a few experiments and said, okay, what else can we do? And from that question, the exploration into some form of self-organization often pops up. And that's just what it is. It's experimentation and trying it out. And you need different language and you need different tools to do that. And one of those things, and that's really kind of the anchoring point of what Nestr offers, is clarity on governance, which means clarity on accountability, right? So yes, like a management hierarchy has an org chart. No one ever uses the org chart to figure out who to talk to. But if you no longer have a boss that tells you what to do, you need to figure out where to go to. So you need an actual live updated version of who's accountable for what, so you can actually address them properly. And then on top of that, obviously collaborate within those agreements. So that's really the problem that we're solving with Nestr. And there's a genuine need for those that are experimenting in it. I think your questioning is very much around, okay, how big is that market, and how big is that market gonna grow? Time will tell.
Yeah, so let's dive into then specifics of Nestr. Then we're talking about self-organizing. We mentioned holacracy. Maybe you want to just define or give a bit of perspective on what that is. And then you mentioned governance equates to accountability. What are the features of Nestr, and how do some of these things start to actually happen through Nestr?
So maybe quickly touch upon holacracy. It's maybe it's one of the two well-known kind of ready-made systems out there to self-organize by, right? So you have sociocracy and holacracy, and they're actually related. They have things in common, and they differ in a few areas. And I'll spare you the details. But it's important to know that you can say, yes, let's start with one of these systems, and they kind of give you a couple of ground rules to play by, and then you can start iterating and really applying that to your organization. What they have in common is they are a set of rules, agreements that all that partake in that initiative, be it a company or community or whatever it might be, have to adhere to and can apply changes to. So I can propose a change to the rules that we are bound by. So that's iterative governance, dynamic governance. Now, and Nestr offers a full suite of tools to do that and to figure out how do you decide, so to make those decisions in the tools and make them instantly transparent. And one of the big innovations that Nestr offers is to tie that to the actual work. There's a bunch of tools out there that do the governance, but they don't tie it to the work. And that's really where kind of things often fall flat. If you say we're going to use holacracy or sociocracy, we have a couple of agreements, and then you're going to start do the work, but it's decoupled from the agreements. And then you kind of fall into informal hierarchies, and those with the loudest voices get their shit done or get people to move along with them, and the others don't. And that's not what you want, right? Then you don't actually get merit-based proper decision being made. That's why it's so important to have the governance part and the actual collaboration tools tied together.
Can I suggest that again, just clarify, but I'm thinking of it in terms of process policy is like how goals, there has to be level of goal setting, and then generally this is how we do things around here. Yeah. Right, so some level of process policy, and then there's the workflow management, which we might say is the breakdown of the tasks and therefore the prioritizations of the current activities and work in progress. Those two kind of areas. So you're saying Nestr, that's kind of some of my language, but yeah, that's basically what Nestr is juggling between the you've put it, the governance, yeah, and the doing the work, right? Yeah,
well, it can, but and then again, because you do use some of the conventional language that some organizations might not use as such. So, but what I think is important, that for anything to get done, you need to have some level of alignment and strategy. So Nestr allows to figure out who's accountable and who or what process is accountable for setting strategy, so that we have strategy, and then that is published to all that fill roles that have some level of accountability to align their work around that strategy and start executing. Right, so there's no delegation as such, but there is a lot of reliance and alignment needed. And I think what is also important to point out, like at this stage, I don't think any tool is going to facilitate an organization shifting from conventional management hierarchy to self-organization, right? That's just, there's so much knowledge that needs to be gained and experience to be gained, that it has to be assisted by a coach, internal or external, and tooling is needed to facilitate that, but it's not going to drive it. Now our attempt is to figure out how much can we automate in that process, and we've got some really exciting experiments and ideas to do that. But we are still very much focusing on working with those change makers that are helping these organizations through these transitions, because it's actually a lot harder to self-organize than it is to sit in the management hierarchy. It's also more deeply frustrating to sit in the management hierarchy and see this waste of your own energy and talents as well as that of your colleagues. Right, so that's why my invitation is to try something new.
Yeah, that's why I never stuck around at a job for more than a year and a half.
Likewise.
That frustration mounts up quickly for people who want more autonomy and see a different type of contribution, etc.
Well, so, maybe an interesting anecdote. I got triggered in my early 20s in 2000 to go into this field while working at General Electric. Wonderful organization where you have many opportunities. But, if you talk about a big management hierarchy, I thought, holy shit, why does this work like this? And why is everybody walking around playing this game and being something they're not? That just triggered my questions around how do we organize and how can that be done differently?
Right. Amazing. All right. So let's transition the conversation. Maybe the next bit will be more of a rapid fire kind of questions to round up a kind of interview. We've really deep dived into the meaning and the purpose and the category of what you're working in. As a a Web3 technology software consulting founder, what are the challenges that come to mind? What do you have to overcome as a personally as a founder?
I don't think they're that different between Web 2 and Web 3, but it probably says more about how I've been looking at organizations my entire career. Like, I think Web 3 is just all of a sudden speaking the language that we've already been speaking.
Right.
So for me, they're the same challenges, right? How do you translate an idea into a viable business model that gets recognized in the market and you can sell, like Startup 101?
Got you. So what advice do you have? What advice can you share to, let's do that in two stages. Let's do the advice to managers, people who have a management position in a command and control kind of situation. What advice can you offer to them for how they can champion the move towards self-organizing at their organization? And that's probably a big enough question. But another one, advice to founders, to Web3 founders, Web2 founders, that obviously want to start, like, I guess the question there is, if an organization is brand new, how can they make the best start into self-organizing when there's only a few of them and they don't have very clear defined roles? There might not even be salary for the early founders before they're pre-revenue. What's the best start for a complete startup towards self-organizing?
So I think the two categories are vastly different. So let me briefly touch on the first one around what the managers do. And I almost want to put out a provocative answer that they can't. There's nothing they can do unless and until those with authority in the management hierarchy say, yes, you can. Okay. Right. So whenever you start that transition, you need to go to those that actually have authority, and those are either the CEO, the board, or the shareholders. So without that authority, you're going to be pushing around in the margins. Because in the end, it's all around about authority. Without authority, and if you don't have that authority, you can still do experiments, but you have to really start with clarity. What authority do I as a manager hold? That's this and it's not that. Well, within that authority, we can play an experiment until it's taken away from me. So it's never quite safe to really play. Now we can dive into more of that, but I think it's an important one to kind of sense into what is my authority. And if you don't have it, claim it, go somewhere else where you can't play. For example, start your own in the Web 2, Web 3 space. What can you do there? Just start with clarity around authority. And I think one thing that and maybe I want to really talk to the DAO space for a second, because one of the problems that I see happening there over and over again is that they kind of step into it, say, we're not going to play the hierarchy game, but there's not really a lot of clarity on what they are going to do. So there's clarity on how we get to the resources, right? That's on chain, like that's a vote of some sort, there's clarity. But how do we decide anything operationally? There's hardly any clarity. And what happens then is that those with the loudest voices make the decisions. Like informal hierarchies show up, and that's usually deeply frustrating and painful for a whole large group of people. Or you have the other extreme, and it is we really strive for harmony, and that's often what you see more in community-based DAOs, and there's just endless debate and hardly anything gets done. So if either of those is familiar to you, you need some help. You need some help in the form of shared agreements on how we actually make decisions. Nestr can support that, and we can actually also tie you to people that can help you through that process through consulting. We don't do that ourselves, but we are a matchmaker there. And then all of a sudden, the other really big problem I see often with founders, not just in Web3, but also in just general self-organization or decentralization, is this idea that I need to hold back so others can step up. And that's I think a massive waste of energy and potential. Like somebody initiates something, that's wonderful. You need to keep driving that, So rather than stepping back, you need to constantly invite others to join. And that's a bit of a delicate dance, but as soon as a founder steps back, that's the source of this whole initiative, everything else will seep with it. So don't step back, but constantly say, hey, this is my opinion, but it's just an opinion, and I don't have authority there. What do you think? And that can only happen if hiring, firing, compensation no longer explicitly lays with the founder, right? If, like within Nestr, we eat our own dog food, right? I cannot hire or fire someone or set their compensation. That's all rooted in governance, that we have a shared agreement around how we make those changes, which means I can really just say anything I want, have all my opinions, but they don't really matter if those that have a role that is accountable don't find it useful. They can just freely ignore me and tell me, shut up, I'm doing work, because I can't hire or fire them anymore. I can't set their compensation. And that's not only liberating for those that join, it's also liberating for me, because I can just freely say, give all my opinions that are usually very valuable. I'll ask my colleagues, but I bring with the source of this organization, I think, a lot of important energy that I shouldn't hold back on. And I see a lot of organizations in self-organization where founders kind of feel they have to hold back. Don't do that.
That is super interesting distinction. Really like that insight. What about roadmap? Like what stage would you say Nestr is at, and where are you looking? What are you looking to do the rest of this year, or what do you see as the roadmap?
Yeah, so this year for us has all been around pivoting to supporting DAOs and proving that we have a business case here. So we're in the middle of that, and we're actually pretty far along. That the business case is there. So we've got a live product, we've got paying customers. Our next step is really to add a few more integrations on the DAO space, and to prove that we've got 10, 20 different DAOs that are all really benefiting from what we're offering there. And then the next step is scaling it up. So both serving the self-organized conventional companies that are really doing decentralization, but just in a conventional company structure, or those that are doing self-organization in the DAO space. For us, they're no different, right? It's really around, okay, how have you organized authority within your organization? If that is decentralized, if you are willing to look at how power is wielded differently than a management hierarchy, we're there to serve you.
Very cool. So rounding up, last couple of touch points. Your Nestr, yourself, you've been through the Helios incubator program. What can you share in terms of expectation going into the Helios incubator program, and something that it's contributed, or how your like, did it change your expectation, or just a bit of reflection?
Yeah, I thought it was wonderful. In all honesty, I went in with not too much expectations, because I just had a few talks with you and a few others, and I thought, geez, bunch of awesome, intelligent people that I can bounce some ideas off. And it turned out to be exactly that and more. So for me, the focus on sharpening the pitch, and not only sharpens your pitch, it also really makes you question and re-question the proposition and the messaging of that proposition. And that in and of itself has been hugely valuable to me. And I even find myself today in this interview speaking, I think, with a better definition of what it is that we're doing than I would have had 8 weeks ago before I started. So I'm deeply appreciative of what Helios has offered us.
Fantastic. Definitely. Personally, I'm very excited to see what Nestr can become. I think these big companies, you mentioned a couple of them, Jira, and what was the other one? Asana. And
Asana, Workday.
We could probably put like 10 different platforms on there. And for the most part, many of them, there's many that we don't hear about because they're not successful, but the ones that we do hear about, they're massive organizations, incredibly successful from a revenue perspective, still limited in what they can actually deliver. This growing new trend of self-empowered governance and self-organizing. So I'm very genuinely excited to see what Nestr is going to do over the coming couple of years. Is there anything that I haven't asked? Any last parting reflections? And we'll come back and do this all again in maybe a few months' time.
I'd say so. Nothing comes to mind. I think it was a wonderful exploration of self-organization and our role in it. I love this topic, so you can call me up in the middle of the night and I'll talk self-organization with you.
Great. All right. On that note, a pleasure, Joost. Thank you. And we'll see you again for another interview, catch up and see where you are in a couple of months.
Look forward to it. Thank you very much.